In every area of our lives, microfungi are working unseen. The safety of this plane is, in some part, due to the knowledge we now have about these tiny forms. Fungi, along with bacteria, break down every living thing back to Earth. Leaving food to go mouldy around the home is one of the few times most of us see microfungi in action. You can never see the beauty of a penicillin mold with the naked eye. You have to look at it under the microscope. Penicillium is just one of 13,000 microfungi held in the National Culture Collection at Kew. It's a storage bank of immense importance. It provides a vital source of fungal strains. They're used for medical, industrial and agricultural research worldwide. They investigate problems that affect our basic safety.
The Institute has long been associated with problems of fungal contamination in aircraft fuel, and what happens is that where you get some fuel in a tank, at the interface of that with air you can get condensation, and in this fungi can grow on the surface of the liquid, and then from that they can clog filters and valves in aircraft and cause problems. We're very interested in trying to develop techniques for the identification of this fungus in low amounts in aircraft fuel at the present time.
I hope you're being successful.
I think this is reasonably under control, certainly by the major airlines.
This vast store of cultures makes up an unusual library of information that can be retrieved at any time. Without the resource, our knowledge of fungal behavior would be severely limited, and our lives would be less safe and less healthy. The cultures are kept deep frozen in liquid nitrogen, and that ensures that the data bank, held in suspended animation, will remain viable for decades. You know, over the years there have been some pretty famous entries here. Have a look at this. You look at this entry here. This is 19th of May 1947. Penicillium notatum, descendant of Fleming's original isolate. You imagine penicillin as having been around for a long time, but in fact it was only isolated in 1929. It's a silly story in a way. Fleming was a bacteriologist, and he was growing bacteria not particularly well, and he allowed them to get contaminated with a fungus. And he isolated the fungus, and it turned out to be this. This is actually the dried remains of what he sent in to the culture collection. And of course it's been subcultured over the years, and there it is, as it is today, alive and kicking. And that's what we owe penicillin to. By no means all of these smaller fungi are beneficial, though. Some of them cause great damage in the countryside. This black spot fungus on a sycamore might go unnoticed, but any homeowner will recognize the unmistakable effects of dry rot fungus.
Well, this is a book which has been attacked by fungus growth, and in libraries and museums there is great concern for artifacts if they're not stored properly because of damage. And only last year we were involved in work on Charles I's death mask, for example, that had some bad deterioration problems due to fungi.
Lichen, an alga and a fungus living together, will only survive in clean air, so lichens are a vital pollution indicator. Surprisingly, many rare species are now returning to our inner cities.
This particular one, for example, Vernia prunastri, was formerly, well, in 1980 it was only known out in the extreme suburbs of London, but small plants of this can now be found in Green Park and Hyde Park, right in the centre, which have come in mainly within the last 2 to 3 years.
And after years of research, the first genuine microfungal food, corn, has hit the market. Cultured from a microscopic fungus, corn seems the dream food of a health-conscious society. It's low in fat, high in fibre, and totally vegetable in origin. Nature can't satisfy the year-round demand for mushrooms with wild varieties alone. The green consumer has doubled consumption over the last 5 years to over 110,000 tonnes. But nature does still play an important part in the cycle. These pigs aren't being reared to eat, but to provide a link in the chain. At the Cheswoods plant in Sussex, it's their manure that forms the basis of a good mushroom compost. There are no added chemicals. The steam coming off is merely a part of the natural fermentation. Contrary to popular belief, mushrooms don't need to be in the dark to grow, but they do have other very exacting requirements. It's actually quite a complicated process. Once the compost has been mixed, it has to be pasteurized to get rid of any unwanted weeds and bugs, if you like. And at that point, the mushroom mycelium can be introduced into it. But it's introduced in a form called spawn, which is in fact grain like this, which has been inoculated with the mycelium. Now that compost is then put into trays like this in an atmosphere of high carbon dioxide and high humidity and a temperature around the middle 70s. And that allows the mycelium to run right the way through the compost. It takes about a couple of weeks to do that. And then, for some reason that nobody really knows the answer to, it's not only ventilated, you get normal atmosphere brought in, but also it has to be cased with a mixture of compost, of peat and chalk. That, for some reason, encourages the fruiting bodies to come up through and start developing. These mushrooms will double in size in 24 hours. The French have a saying, pousse comme un champignon, push like a mushroom.
Make room for the mushrooms. Make room for the mushrooms.
Mushrooms add magic to any meal. You can pep up a pizza, cheer up chicken, slice up a salad, make a sauce special.
Make room for the mushrooms. Make room for the mushrooms.
Make room for the mushrooms!
Now, the mushroom growing industry is very big business indeed these days. It's worth £370 million a year. We actually spend more on mushrooms than we do on baked beans. But unfortunately, we're still very conservative about it. Only 1% of the mushrooms we buy are anything other than the common white varieties.
The commercial white mushroom, Agaricus bisporus, was specially developed to keep its smooth, unblemished appearance from the moment it's picked till it sizzles in the pan. The timing's crucial. Tiny buttons soon grow into large flat caps, and although the supermarket buyer may prefer the convenience of pre-packs, consumers are demanding a more natural and better tasting product.
Our policy is one of minimum possible use of chemicals. For example, on our brown cap mushrooms, which we've just introduced, we are recognised by the Soil Association as an organic producer. That means we don't use any chemicals at all. We have a very simple procedure that if we have any disease on our beds, for example, or any migrant mushrooms, as it were, we just use salt to kill them off.
There's no reason why you shouldn't do a small-scale version of commercial mushroom growing in your own home, actually, or in your garden. There are a couple of kits here. Now, both of these are suitable for growing under your lawn. What you have to do, actually, is to mix the spawn with compost, peel the turf back, spread it under the turf, put the turf back, and theoretically, hey presto. Of course, what you produce and when you produce it is to some extent dependent on the weather. You can also use these indoors, but it's pretty elaborate. You've got to have bales of straw and keep them moist and all the rest of it, and it's not the ideal thing for your living room. What you can do, which involves an awful lot less clutter, is to use a kit like this. Now, this comes in kind of two parts. If I take that top bit out. This is straw and compost with the mushroom spawn run through it, and it's moist. What you then do is to add the casing, which is peat and chalk, and this is also moist. spread that out. Now the purpose of that is to encourage the mushrooms to grow up through the compost. That has to be kept moist, and you can tell by just squeezing it with your fingers. If a bit of moisture comes out, then it's okay. And you leave it for about 3 or 4 weeks. And after that, you will have the first crop ready to pick. Now those aren't particularly large, but if you have a bit of patience, you can grow beauties like that, which actually taste a darn sight better than the little ones. So it's worth waiting.
France is often regarded as the gourmet's paradise when it comes to wild and edible mushroom species. There's certainly enough interest to sustain a whole mushroom museum just outside Saumur, alongside the banks of the Loire. But ultimately, the French too rely on the ubiquitous Agaricus bisporus, albeit grown in slightly different circumstances.
This is the French equivalent of the common or garden British button mushroom. But no boring mushroom sheds for the French. They like to do things in style with a bit of flair. So these are being grown in these magnificent limestone caverns. It's not exactly small business. There's a turnover of something like 250,000 tons a year. Two giants fly the home market, freeze, can, export, and they're in turn supplied by a lot of small firms, although not so small always. There are something like 18,000 sacks in these caverns alone.
Alors, ce qui est bien ce champignon, c'est qu'on a une qualité, vous voyez, absolument merveilleuse. Voilà. Très bon.
Lighting and heating bills are kept to a minimum because the temperature remains constant.
These are called champignons de Paris, but we are in fact a long way from Paris at the moment, and thereby hangs a tale.
It was the Sun King, Louis XIV, who first ordered mushrooms to be cultivated for the royal table. But it wasn't until around 1810 that serious cultivation of the button mushroom got underway. This was in the disused caves 160 feet down beneath the city of Paris, under what's now the 14th arrondissement, at the Place d'Italie, Malakoff, and Montrouge just south. Thousands of kilos of mushrooms were grown. But when work started on the underground railway system, the metro, in 1898, the growers were forced to move out and look around for a new location. The Loire Valley around Saumur seemed ideal. The soft stone had been quarried here since the Middle Ages. The resulting empty caves were already in use for maturing and storing wine. They still are today, but with literally miles of caves lying empty, it seemed the perfect spot, dark and cool. Thousands of tons are now grown in the Loire Valley, but the name Champignon de Paris still sticks. Besides making excellent underground mushroom factories, the troglodyte caves of this area provide a summer home for author and journalist Jane Grigson. Although she's a fan of wild mushrooms, she's learned how to make the most of the local produce.
For instance, a beautiful white close mushroom like this is wonderful eaten raw in a salad. You just clean it up. In France, they always sell them with a sort of earthy base. In England, they're cut off. It's a different way of picking them. And if you just slice it up and put it with a little French dressing and some greenery, sort of rocket and lettuce and things like that, it makes a wonderful salad. Another thing is, of course, very simply to fry them with a little butter and garlic, parsley. If you want to give the flavour a little oomph, you can add some dried sap, like this packet here, you see, bollet and sap. And if you just take a pinch and soak them and add them to a mushroom soup or a mushroom brew, you get a much meatier flavour. Well, I've made a mushroom soup. You see, it's beautiful mushroom colour. I've cooked 8 ounces of mushrooms, a large slice of onion, and some chicken stock, 2 pints of chicken stock. Then I've whizzed that to be smooth, thickened it with a flour and butter roux, and now I'm just waiting to make the last sort of final adjustments, which are 1/4 pint of milk, 1/4 pint of cream. You can, of course, adjust these to your taste. If you want to add less cream, that's all right. It's just up to you. But this is the original recipe from, I think, Mrs. Lyle's Gentle Art of Cookery. And that all goes in, makes it nice and creamy. And then finally, when we've stirred this in, and of course I would reheat it so that it was heating temperature. I've tasted and adjusted the seasoning, and I've got to do that again, having added the cream and milk. Lovely, doesn't need more salt. Now the last thing I do, this is the strange addition. This is Sauterne, which is, of course, a sweet wine, which you mightn't think of putting in a mushroom soup. But it is absolutely wonderful, because mushrooms, like every other vegetable, have their own sweetness. And this wine just brings it out beautifully. And there we are. And that you will put in, having heated it up. Don't boil off the alcohol. And serve it with a little parsley if you like, crouton if you like. But it's really very beautiful and doesn't need anything with it.
Over in eastern France, high in the Jura Mountains, the summer is all too short, so the tradition of preserving is important. In the tiny village of Le Crête-à-Chalon, the Pernot family now have 3 generations of mushroom collectors, the spring morels being everybody's favourite. These are threaded onto rosaries, as Madame Pernot calls them, and left to dry. Stored in an airtight jar, they keep for months.
Ouais, il n'y a pas une année pareille. Par exemple, cette année, c'est une bonne année. Mais alors, par exemple, l'année dernière, on n'en avait pas tellement. Hein. Alors, on ne peut pas dire. Ça va de 300 grammes sèches, enfin, parce qu'on les pèse quand elles sont sèches. Alors, 300 grammes, ou 250 ou 300 grammes. Et puis alors, une vraiment bonne année, enfin, je ne sais pas cette année, mais peut-être 500 grammes sèches.
It takes 10 pounds of fresh mushrooms to make 1 pound of dried. And for those that can't pick and dry their own, Continental Delicatessens provide a wide range to choose from.
Basically, the dry ones are picked fresh in the woods. They're cleaned with a penknife, they're not washed. They're sliced, dried in the sun, usually under a clear sky, not a cloudy sky where they tend to go black. Then they're soaked. You take them home, you put them in a warm bowl of water, just enough water to cover the mushrooms. Leave them 20 minutes to half hour. Then you fish the mushrooms out and use most of the water except for the very bottom, which has some grit in the bottom of the water. And you can make a nice stufatino, which is it's an alpine dish. You serve it with cornmeal polenta, and it's a very rich, warming dish in winter. Or you can make a sort of mushroom sauce, like a bolognese, but instead of using meat, use the mushroom, which is popular with vegetarians, or soup, or in minestrone. Basically, there's any way you would use meat, you can use mushrooms as a substitute.
Thank you.
And according to Alberto Camisa, we're getting more adventurous with the kinds of mushrooms we're willing to try.
Thank you. Goodbye.
In London's Covent Garden, another Italian, Antonio Carluccio, has built up a name for his wild mushroom dishes. His passion for collecting, cooking and preserving mushrooms is something he likes to share with his customers.
We have here a little selection. Dried. That's very interesting here because the only one that I buy dried, which is very useful for sauces and so on, is the morel, because they are not available here in England. Otherwise, everything is collected by us here. One way to use them is to use these as a scent, if you like it. You can use, for example, the normal button mushroom, and you have the texture, the fresh texture, and then you soak some of those and you give the flavor. Another way to use them is the very old specimen, dry them and reduce them to powder, which I managed to incorporate in some pasta. So the pasta is wonderful because it has the taste of the mushroom already in it. Really very beautiful.
The temptation is to serve everything freshly picked, but when there's a glut, he likes to put some away for a rainy day.
And I really feel just like a squirrel preserving this stuff here. This is a wonderful exemplar of dried saddle, which is Polyporus squamosus, and they are very good when they are so tender and young like that. For preserving, they're fantastic actually, and they taste very well indeed. So we have some of those, and then we will have also some of the other one here, which are the famous Pleurotus cornucopiae, which is one sort of oyster mushroom. Now, they are very lovely to preserve because they have a wonderful taste. Voila. You don't need to wash them because they are all very clean. And the bits and pieces that you got here, they disappear when you drain them. Now, we have now cut the mushrooms, and here I have got some vinegar, 2 parts of vinegar, 1 of water, to which I will add salt, cloves, and peppercorns. Now, while it's boiling like that, I put everything in it, and it has to cook for about 10 minutes, and from that moment on, they shouldn't be touched anymore with hands, otherwise the bacteria, they come back. And we put them on this cloth here, the vinegar, to dry them a little bit. Oh, they're wonderful. You can see the tenderness. So now the next operation is, after they are cooled, we take a clean jar and some olive oil, and we start to bottle them. Always without to touch it. We put, first of all, a little bit of olive oil there, so that the olive oil now has 2 functions. First of all, preserving function, in fact, doesn't preserve, saves the mushroom to be in contact with the air, otherwise could also go moldy. And the second, using the olive oil, is it gives a lovely flavor. So I usually do it like that, bit at a time, and you know, making sure that they are coated on each side.
And the finished results are displayed on the walls of the restaurant. Not purely for show, they're used to add flavour to just about anything, including chanterelles preserved in Strega for dessert.
Mushrooms, it became my way of life in a certain sense. It's something lovely to find, first of all. So you go into the woods and you don't look just simply at flowers or plants or whatever, but you look for those delicacy, which they are delicacy. And when you are contaminated by this illness, or then you never lose it. It's incredible. You look more and more for mushrooms, and no walks is the same anymore.
Next week is the last chance to conjure up some mushroom magic, when Michael will be auditioning for the Black and White Truffle Show and revealing that it's not just cars and electronics that the Japanese excel at, they're developing mushrooms too. All next Friday at 9:30. And do please remember that you should never cook or eat any mushroom that you cannot identify as being absolutely safe. And if you are unsure of what's safe and what's not, then you can increase your